All right, welcome back, everybody, to Culz Interviews. This week we're delving into a event that I know me and Sam have briefly mentioned on our old channel a little bit, but we've never really gone in depth. And thanks to an awesome new book, Bridging the Tragedy, we get to talk about that a little bit more with both of the authors. And I will let them introduce themselves right now.
Well, hello, everybody. Keegan, Sam, thanks for having us. I'm Bill Kousoulas, author number one.
I'm Jackie Kousoulas, author number one. Just kidding.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. Like I said, I was reading your book, and it's really fascinating because I think a lot of times when you read anything Mothman related, it's more just about the cryptid or alien or whatever people want to call it, and not the actual people that were involved. And I really like that take that you guys did. I know when Mark kind of mentioned you guys and what your book was about, you guys were like number one on my list because I just thought it was such a unique take. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So, do you guys just want to give a little bit of background about you two and like how you guys got involved with the whole Silver Bridge tragedy stuff?
So, my introduction to the whole Mothman genre really was the movie, 2002 Richard Gere movie. And I found that to be really fascinating. What I really enjoyed about it was not that I thought it was an awesome movie. I just loved the story behind it. I thought it was well done, but not a great movie. But it really captivated me. And within the next couple of years, I went out and first bought John Keel's Mothman Prophecies book and read that, and then picked up the audio version as well. And that was, I think, the very first audiobook, or one of the first two or three that I bought, and was just blown away by it. The paranormal instances that happened in Point Pleasant in 66 and 67 are pretty well documented, especially the Mothman itself. This creature that had black wings and red eyes and never physically really hurt anybody, but really scared people half to death in Point Pleasant and the surrounding area for about 13 months exactly, from November 15th of 66 through December 15th of 67. There were all kinds of sightings of this creature, but what I found really fascinating about the whole Mothman story was really the additional things that happened in Point Pleasant during that time. And the way that I like to explain the events that took place in 66 and 67 in the Ohio River Valley is that primarily it was just a microcosm of things that took place similar to how Skinwalker Ranch is described today. There were aliens, there were UFOs, there were lights in the sky, Mothman, of course, and there were men in black, there were cattle mutilations, there were bodies found in a cave behind the TNT area. Just crazy stuff, off the charts, paranormal, poltergeist type activity that really culminated in the Silver Bridge collapse. So, my introduction to the whole genre, again, was the movie and then the book and the audio book. And for the next probably 10 plus years, 15 years, I really studied the whole thing. In 2016, Jackie and I decided to go to Point Pleasant, and we had a wonderful, wonderful experience in Point Pleasant upon arriving. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so when we went to Point Pleasant the first time, we got there after the museum closed. We were there after 5 o'clock because on the way there, we went to Serpent Mound, and we stayed at Serpent Mound for like half the day, and then from there we went to Point Pleasant. It was a little bit of a hike to get there. So not knowing the museum hours or anything like that, we just figured we had time, and so we went across the bridge, the Silver Bridge, the Memorial Bridge, and ended up in Point Pleasant and went to the museum. And I remember when we went over the bridge and we were like, where do we go? What do we do? And we looked off to our left and you could see the back side of the Mothman statue. And it's like, oh, there's the Mothman statue. You're like so excited, to see everything that we could see. So we went around the block and came down because it's a one-way street and got in front of the museum, parked, and the museum was closed. So we went over, of course, got our pictures taken with Mothman, and then started walking down towards the river. And when you cross the street where the Mothman statue is and continue going down towards the river, we walked past this little restaurant. It was called Harris's Steakhouse, and on the window it said Mothman Diner. And I looked over and I saw a little lady standing in the window, and she just kind of watched us pass. And so I said to my husband, I I think that lady wants to talk to us. And he said, no, let's go see what's down here. And I'm like, no, but seriously, I think she wants to talk to us. So we turned around and went back inside, and we met Carolyn Harris. And Carolyn was one of the sweetest women I know. She took so much time with us. Every time we walked in there, she stopped doing what she was doing to sit and talk with us. She said she'd be happy to answer any questions we had about Mothman and the paranormal activity. What she wouldn't discuss was the bridge. We found out later the reason she wouldn't discuss the bridge. We bought the book, The Silver Bridge, at the River Museum, and in the book was a picture of her son that was 2 years old that was on the bridge that died. It collapsed and died, went down. And that that just broke my heart when I saw that. But anyway, so that was the main pull why we ended up writing the book the way we wrote the book, because Carolyn touched our hearts so deeply. She was so humble. Bill said to her, "You look familiar," and she said, well, have you seen it in the documentaries? And he said, yeah, I have. And she said, we asked her how many she was in, and she said 16 or 17 of them, and she kind of blushed, and she, was like, she was humble about it. So it was really sweet the way she did it. So that's my little take on our first day and what happened.
Yeah, no,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, she definitely seems like she left an impression on you guys, because I know reading your book, she definitely comes up a lot. So I definitely think it was really sweet to, like, tell her story, keep that alive. I know we try to do that with some of our stuff, is just help keep people's stories alive and tell their viewpoints and stuff. So.
Well, we had actually spent about a week in Point Pleasant. The trip was, hey, we live in the Chicagoland area. We're not, I like to tell people, we're not really in the skyscraper part of Chicagoland. We're in the cornfields part on the outside of all that. So we drove all the way to the Serpent Mound, which is probably, I don't know, 500-mile drive. We did that, I think, on the 4th of July or right around that in 2016. And we turned around, we drove into Point Pleasant the next day, which is another 100 miles or maybe a little more than that from the Serpent Mound area. But we met Carolyn the first night, and then every day we were in town, we stopped into her diner and had a cup of coffee or a sandwich or a soda or whatever it was. We just wanted to visit with her because she made us so comfortable. We really liked her. It felt like we were sitting at a kitchen table with family member. I mean, that's what it really seemed like. And so when we left town, we went back into our workaday worlds and our lives and our careers and all this kind of thing. We kind of had this mountaintop experience. And we went to Point Pleasant. We met this really wonderful lady. We got to see the TNT area, which is where the Mothman allegedly was showing himself for the first time in town. And we got to meet Jeff Wamsley, who runs the Mothman Museum, who later became a friend of ours in subsequent years. But we went back into our lives, back into our careers. Jackie was working as a postmaster at the time, and I had a career in technology sales and was also a graduate student. So when I finished my semester in December, then all of a sudden it's getting to be Christmas time, and you do your last minute shopping and all that kind of a thing. And on Christmas Eve, we were headed out to Jackie's mom's house, which is about an hour and 15-minute drive. And I told Jackie, I said, hey, I think we should get a hold of Carolyn. She gave us her phone numbers. We haven't called them yet. Let's give her a call. And she said, well, why don't you wait till after the holidays? People are busy during the holidays. We're busy during the holidays. She has family. Call her after the first of the year. So the very next day, on Christmas Day, we got a message from a gentleman by the name of Mark Griffith, who's one of the guys who's in our book. We met him with Carolyn, and he let us know that Carolyn had had a heart attack on Christmas Eve. And the next day, Carolyn passed away. So we went from having this wonderful experience with this lady to kind of thinking about her an awful lot for the next few months, then coming up with an idea to get a hold of her to see if she'd let us write a story about her life. And then she was gone. And for us, it was absolutely devastating. And it felt like we'd finally met this lady. We really wanted to write something about Point Pleasant, not necessarily about Mothman, but kind of about her. We didn't really come up with the idea for the story until a few years later down the road. But that's kind of how we got to where we got in terms of wanting to write the book itself.
Yeah, no, definitely heartbreaking when somebody just goes out of the blue like that. We've had similar experiences where we've kind of planned out episodes. We had one with my like late papu, who passed away kind of suddenly, but he had worked in the missile silos out here, so we were going to do a whole episode on the abandoned missile silos, and then just
Cool.
one day it was gone, and I was like, oh man,
Yeah.
yeah, it stinks. But yeah, no, like I said, your guys' book definitely keeps her memory alive, at least, and hopefully can reach a lot more people. You spoke about Mark, and I have a little note because his was one where one thing I really liked about his was the account that the people in town called it Birdman. And then he definitely was very confident it was just like the failure of the engineering of the bridge. But yeah, I definitely thought it was interesting that, Mothman obviously was called Birdman. Some of the media called it Batman. It kind of created a joke where we're like, well, it just sounds like Michael Keaton characters at this point. But yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, I mean, obviously it was called Birdman in town. Media calls it Batman. What kind of made it the Mothman, if that makes sense?
Sure. Well, I mean, like you said, really, it was the media that turned it into Mothman. And the way that I've kind of understood the legend is that, as you mentioned, Mark called it the Birdman. And in Point Pleasant, they referred to it primarily as the bird. It wasn't known as Mothman until the media got a hold of it and then spun it into this name of Mothman. And it really stuck. If you've seen the figures and the renditions and the drawings, it doesn't really look like a moth, so to speak, but it was the best way to be able to describe it. And the way that it was described to me was, and I've not gone back and studied the old Batman episode, but I've been told that it comes from a Batman episode, that there actually is a creature named Mothman in the Batman episodes somewhere, but I can't verify that. I've just heard that.
See, now let me check something actually.
Now they pay reference to it in Fallout and Fallout 76,
Yeah, because yeah,
which is
Mothman's
a game.
definitely inspired a bunch of different things. I'm trying to see because I have like a whole like Batman like appendix. So I'm like, I wonder if it's in there. Like that'd be hilarious. Like if I just
Well,
like
while you're looking, if you'd like to know a little bit about Mark, Mark was actually with Carolyn in the
Mhm.
diner the day that we met him, and he's become a friend of ours. He keeps up with us. I usually hear from him at least once a month, sometimes several times a week. He just calls to visit, and he's your typical West Virginia fella. He's got that thick Southern drawl. He's a retired guy. He's in his 60s, and he just likes to call and, like he says, chew the fat. Just visit, just talk. And
yeah,
he's a neat character. He really is. When we first met, he had told us that he had lost a couple of twin children in infancy, twin children, and what a devastating story he had. And so at one point, I think it was in 2019, I went to Point Pleasant. Jackie wasn't able to go with me, but I interviewed him, wanted to talk to him about that story and what that was like, and just to get a little bit more insight into him personally and some of the trauma that he had gone through. But then we interviewed him for the book too, and we wanted him to know that he was going to be the very first interview in the book, because really he and Carolyn, we met them together, so he was inspirational to us, and we wanted to get his story as well.
yeah, no, and I think it's a great story to start with. Like it's so down to earth, like you said, and it's like matter of fact, like it. I don't know if I like get a read as far as if he believed in the Mothman or Birdman as he called it. But yeah, I mean, it was just so interesting, especially to read the parts about how they inspected the bridges back in the day, or I should say, their very questionable tactics at inspecting bridges back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Mark
um,
definitely did not believe in Mothman. He thought it
yeah,
was all a bunch of phooey. I thought that because when he first moved from Nitro to Point Pleasant, he was like 8 years old, I think, and he said he was out walking. I think this is in his interview. He was out walking just to see what Point Pleasant was about, and some lady told him that he shouldn't be out alone because there was a big bird flying around, and the look on his face when he talked about that during the interview was like you could just see like it took him back, and he was still scared. He's like, what do you tell a kid that you want to scare him half to death? And I thought that that's part of the the reason basically was the post-traumatic stress from knowing that there's this creature flying around in a new town where he's going to probably be nervous anyway to just have moved to. But it goes deeper than that with Mark, though. I think that his belief. So
Mark was really interesting too. Although he professed he didn't believe in Mothman, he was the person that took us out to the TNT area the first time we went there. And the TNT area is about 11 miles north of Point Pleasant on Route 62, right along the Ohio River. And we went out to the igloos, and there are these concrete domes. There are about 100 of them in this old wildlife refuge now. But they were a place back in World War II where TNT was manufactured for the World War II effort. And so as we walked back into the igloo area and we went to go into the first igloo, Mark was really spooked. I mean, you could tell there was something about him that he wasn't super comfortable being out there in these woods. So as much as he says he didn't believe in Mothman, something was making him a little bit spooked.
Yeah, and I think I've seen the TNT area, at least I think it was Expedition X did an episode about it.
yes,
And
Did
it could definitely be a very spooky site. Like I could definitely see that. Like no, it looks so fascinating. I'm actually quite jealous that you guys have been able to visit that. And I mean, we've never been out to West Virginia. We've traveled to a lot of the states, but like just that little section we have not quite made it to yet. So, but
Plan
you
to
brought,
though.
yeah, we definitely plan to at some point. Hopefully, we can get to the festival, that and the Braxton County one. But you've brought up the term post-traumatic growth in your book, and for a lot of people, I don't know if they all know that one. Obviously, they know like PTSD or stuff like that. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about the post-traumatic growth? Because obviously, that's kind of like the through line through your book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when I decided to go back to graduate school, and this has been 2010, I went back to school in 2010 and began studying psychology formally. And by the time I got to the graduate part of my experience, I got introduced to the concept of positive psychology, which is focusing on the good things in life and then building upon them. And there's a whole industry that's out there right now that's not necessarily counseling, but it's coaching. It's helping people that don't necessarily have pathology when it comes to their own personal, mental state, but they want to do better than they're doing. So it's a matter of focusing on positive things and growing them up. And one aspect of positive psychology is the concept of post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth, or PTG, which is the acronym, has been around for about 20, 25 years. There are a couple of professors that developed the concept out of the University of Pennsylvania. And the whole idea is that when we go through traumatic events, we have the opportunity to grow as a result of going through those traumatic events. And a lot of times we think in terms of, let's say, a devastating thing happens, like what we see today is unfortunately all these school shootings and public places where people are being massacred for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And the way that will traumatize the people who have lost loved ones in cases like that, or we could talk about earthquakes, like what happened in Turkey and Syria just a couple of weeks ago, and how that changes the way the survivors look at life. I mean, what the concept that I've been introduced to, or the way it's been described to me, is that it shatters your cognitive schemas, or basically your way of seeing the world. But the ability to be able to grow, not necessarily in spite of those negative things, but because of them, which is kind of counterintuitive. It doesn't make immediate sense, but when we think about it, you talk about what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? So we go through these tough things, and we might lose a loved one, or we might get fired from a job that we really like, or whatever it might be. You kind of pick yourself up, you surround yourself with people that care about you. If you have a faith, maybe that faith grows. And as a result of going through this trauma, good things happen. So when Jackie and I took a look at the Silver Bridge disaster and everything associated with the Mothman brought us to Point Pleasant, but the community of Point Pleasant and the people there kept us coming back. We just fell in love with the region, the way that the people treated us, and you could tell what they'd been through. Carolyn specifically lost her first husband and her son in the bridge disaster. What a horrible thing, but Carolyn turned her life into really a statement to be able to give back to the community. And she was very instrumental in bringing the Mothman Festival to Point Pleasant and growing this whole region up. So post-traumatic growth really is a matter of being able to grow, as a result of going through things that we would have thought would have devastated us as people. In a nutshell, that's what it comes down to.
Is it crazy at all that, like you said, it's only been around like 20, 25 years that people are just now kind of looking at like how that affects people?
And I think Keegan, that it's been around longer than it's been called this.
Okay.
Because we take a look at what's happened in history, and let's say World War II. Look at the Japanese, how they responded after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They came back as a commercial icon. I mean, they just took over industry and technology and all these different things. I think it's been around longer than it's actually been named that. I think the gentlemen that started the concept of it and have been able to build it into what it is today got their arms around it, applied scientific methodology to it, and then built it up into what it is now. So to answer your question, yeah, I mean, it's a little interesting that it took them a while to get around to that, but I think it's been going on, since mankind suffered loss from the very beginning.
Yeah, and you talk about some of those big events. I mean, we're close to Columbine. Obviously, that caused a big like ripple effect within the community there. And then obviously like 9/11 is probably another big one, or even going back further, Pearl Harbor and like just the growth out of that. So yeah, no,
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting take because, like I said, a lot of people when they talk about Mothman, it's just all the creature and then the bridge collapse and everything's kind of like secondarily. Where your book's more like the people and like their stories and what happens. And I think it's so fascinating. Before we get into some more, because we've talked about Point Pleasant a little bit, do you want to just describe Point Pleasant to the viewers, like as far as the town, how it feels, like the environment, kind of there?
Magical. It does feel magical. It's like there's an energy there that it does. It feels magical. I mean, we have more, or at least I have more paranormal experiences there in short times than I do anywhere that I've been so far. And it doesn't feel like it's evil or anything like that. There's not like a heavy dark energy. It is friendly. It's a little sleepy little town with friendly people, and I don't know. I think the energy from the rivers or something, the confluence of the rivers, might give it some of that magical feeling. But I mean, it's got a lot of American history. The first Revolutionary battle was fought in Point Pleasant. George Washington named the town by standing at the point and looking out and saying, "This is a pleasant point," and it was later changed to Point Pleasant. It's just a nice little town. It's growing. It's growing. The town's growing. There's a lot of nice shops on Main Street now, and it's a good time. Going out to the TNT, on the other hand, is a little more creepy, and it's a little more haunting feeling. But when you're in Point Pleasant itself, it's very nice. The Mothman Festival, I'll tell you, that's one of the best festivals that I've ever been to in my life. It's family friendly, it's clean. Um, the whole town chips in and makes it nice for everybody that's there. They don't put up with anything that's going to cause any chaos or fights or anything like that. So if you ever want to go and you like festivals, that's the place to go. When we were there this last festival, there was over 30,000 people in this little town in just that weekend. So and there was order, but it was fun. It was a blast.
Yeah, no, the Mothman Festival has definitely been one on our list that we've wanted to go to. I mean, we go to Roswell for their festival, and that's so much fun. But yeah, we want to come out there for your. Have you ever done the Flatwoods one? Because I know
No,
they have like a flat. No.
we haven't even been to Flatwoods, and that's like something that we're always going to add when we go to Point Pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, we end up going the other direction. So we always end up down in Charleston area if we leave Point Pleasant. So I would like to go to Flatwoods.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Hopefully someday we can get to that. Both of those. Kind of talking about Point Pleasant though. I know when reading Susan's account, there was a part where it said like the collapse led kind of like to the downfall of Point Pleasant because of how the highway was rerouted. But it sounds at least like today maybe Mothman in a way has helped it kind of rebound.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we were talking about with Susan. It kind of came to that point where during the discussion, it's like, okay, so the bridge was going to collapse. There was an issue with I-bar 13. There was a hairline fracture that caused the bridge to actually collapse and go down in the river. And the when they rebuilt it, they went around Point Pleasant instead of through Point Pleasant, so the commerce all died slowly. So that could have happened, as Susan said, because malls might have taken, their business away anyway. But whatever the event, if Mothman had not occurred, Point Pleasant would just be another little dead American town like so many of them are. And now because Jeff Wamsley has opened the museum and the community stepped, behind him to allow the festival, to allow the visitors and, and be friendly and welcoming to everyone, they need the shops now. They need for people to have places to go. They need the restaurants. So yeah, Mothman possibly did save Point Pleasant. Maybe not back in 66, 67, but maybe in 2000, 2010, 2020.
Yeah, and it's kind of similar in a way to a topic we cover a lot, which is Billy the Kid, where like Fort Sumner has become like a stopping point for a lot of people. Where if Billy the Kid wasn't shot and buried there, I'm sure that town might have been like long gone by now.
Right.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. And I know Mothman's pretty big. They got that. How tall is that statue, the silver one? Is it like 7 feet, 10 feet, something like that?
The number that pops into my head is it's like 12 feet tall.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was
That
pretty
may be
big.
from the very base of it to the very top of it, so it stands on a pedestal. So I think that's the one that pops into my head. I'm not positive about that.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty big. It's quite interesting. It definitely, if you look at like, I was trying to pull up some pictures while we were talking of like the character of Mothman,
It's 10 feet.
and I don't know if you guys can see, but it kind of like resembles that in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
So I was like, that's kind of interesting.
It's really muscular, yeah.
Yeah, it has the abs and everything. Do you want to talk about like some of the like how much of the community is like on board with Mothman, or like how much is like kind of annoyed by it? Because I'm sure they get asked about it a lot. I know we've talked to people in Roswell where they're like kind of sick of hearing about the UFOs. Like,
Sure.
is it the same way there?
We haven't really encountered that in terms of people being tired of it, but I'm sure there are. We live in a town, Sycamore, Illinois, that's famous for the Pumpkin Festival. So every year at the courthouse lawn in Sycamore, kids decorate pumpkins. There's a big parade. 100,000 people come to our town, which is just a 20,000 person town. And I pretty much hide from that and have for decades. I want nothing to do with it. I know there are people in Point Pleasant, which is more like 5,000 people, that I'm sure they hide from the Mothman Festival and the 30,000 people that show up during Mothman Festival. What's been really interesting, and Denny Bellamy, who's one of our interviewees and who's been in all
Yes.
kinds of documentaries, he's really a big ambassador for the whole community in Mason County. He's the president or the CEO of the Mason County Visitors and Convention Bureau. So he's a really integral part of the festival and everything that goes on there. But he talks about how the community's really rallied behind Jeff Wamsley and behind Carolyn when Carolyn was around, to be able to say, hey, look, this is a huge revenue stream for us. This is a boon to our economy. We need to support this. If you don't like Mothman, just keep your mouth shut. Just leave it alone. And that's really what's kind of happened there. I think early on, what was described to us when Jeff Wamsley really wanted to get the festival going, and Carolyn Harris as well, there was a lot of pushback because people didn't want to be associated with that nonsense, which is basically the way that a lot of the folks in the community said that that's what it was. But when Denny finally pointed to some of the financiers in Point Pleasant and said, look, we've got $2 million that walks down the street on Mothman Saturday here. You're not taxing it. We need to figure out a way to get this, revenue coming into our town. When they finally understood that, the people in the community, like I say, they kind of backed off from the negativity that they maybe were feeling and didn't want to be associated with Mothman because they realized how important it was to the town. So the people that we talk to when we're in Point Pleasant, whether they believe in Mothman or not, they're respectful of the fact that we're there. They welcome us, and I'm sure they do that to anybody else who comes to town looking for that, so long as they're respectful, so long as they're not coming in and being jerks, which I don't know. I don't hear a lot about that. I don't think we've heard anything about people coming to town and being disrespectful.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that people are like actually going there and just being kind and not because we've seen some people being crazy in different places. So I'm glad that that has not come there.
Yeah, I've heard from different people. Actually, one of the people we interviewed, but I'm not going to say because I'm not positive which fellow it was. But they literally leave Point Pleasant on Mothman Saturday during the festival. They don't go, and I get that because we don't go to Pumpkin Fest.
Yeah. Yeah, and interestingly enough, during the Mothman Festival, there were 11 people that we interviewed for the book. The only ones that we saw were Susan Sayer. She was there. Jeff Wamsley, of course, because he's basically the guy that's organized the whole thing and kind of in charge of everything. He was there. We saw Linda Lane and Marva Bailey the night before. They live in Gallipolis, Ohio. They're on the other side of the river. They were there, but they didn't go to the festival. Andy Colvin was there. He kind of helped support us as we were, doing our thing in our booth, and he came in when we gave our talk about our experience of the book and that kind of thing. But at least half of the people we interviewed weren't there, and can't
Marky.
blame them. Mark was there with us as well.
Because like in Roswell, everything is become more and more alien themed. Like even like their barber shops have like aliens on them and stuff. Now, is it the same way in Point Pleasant? Like, is there more and more Mothman stuff popping up?
I think so. It seems to me like at Pizza Village Pizza, where a bunch of us always meet when we go to Point Pleasant, they have a Mothman pizza. And like almost everywhere you go, you can find something that's Mothman related. The different stores that have opened up aren't all Mothman, but there is Mothman stuff in them. So, or cryptic kind of stuff also.
Mm.
So paranormal, it's all there.
Okay. And I know you just mentioned, is it Gallipolis you said? Was it?
Gallipolis, Ohio.
Okay. I wanted to make sure I got the name right. But I know in the book there it was brought up a couple times again when the bridge collapsed, it actually helped that town, kind of thrive a little bit more.
There were a few people that spoke about that. When the bridge went down on December 15th of 67, it took 2 years to get the new bridge put together so that it was something that could be used. And Jackie had recalled that in one of our interviews, we were told that even when it went up, that there were problems with it and they had to shut it down again. But the long story short is, what is it, a mile or 2 miles, would you say, to the south of Point Pleasant now? Does that sound accurate?
The bridge?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
It's a ways south of town now. And so what's happened is all the interstate travel that used to go right through downtown Point Pleasant and over the road truck drivers and people just commuting or going on vacation, they would stop in Point Pleasant. They'd have dinner, they'd have lunch, they'd go to the shops, they'd fill up their cars with gas or the semis. All that traffic has been rerouted and totally bypasses Point Pleasant now, but it does go through Gallipolis, or it's very close to Gallipolis. So it's really simple to get off right there and to do your shopping, and all types of different stores kind of popped up over the course of the next few decades, while downtown Point Pleasant really kind of went down the tubes. So yeah, the traffic and the rerouting of the bridge really changed Point Pleasant. But a few of the people we interviewed also stated that Marva Bailey was the one that comes to mind for me, that she doesn't think downtown Point Pleasant could have supported the traffic as things have really expanded in terms of that flow of vehicles since then. And I think she's right. Rick Handley, who is actually a highway commissioner in Mason County, who's in the book as well, he said the same thing. He said, yeah, we missed the business downtown, but we don't think that the infrastructure could have supported all that traffic.
Yeah, the bigger cars and a lot more people for sure.
Yeah, they would have had to tear down some of the historical buildings, which would have been sad because that's what gives the main street a lot of character. Plus,
Mhm.
there's the Low Hotel that's right there. So the old post office and the Low Hotel are the two like really old buildings, and the Low Hotel is a haunted hotel. You don't want to tear that down. You don't want to touch it because I mean that thing's long. It takes up almost an entire block.
Yeah, no, it's really sad. I mean, I love architecture, and a lot of times like you see New York going around building stuff and just tearing down some like super beautiful and super old buildings and put up just like a normal glass box, and yeah, it's quite sad. Kind of getting back to like the bridge, there was the story of like Linda where like the day before or the night before it collapsed, her and a friend drove over it, and her friend like thought she heard like a crack.
That's what she said. Linda told her she was crazy, but I don't think she was. And I think that we talked to someone else at the festival that thought that they had heard something too prior to the bridge going down.
Yeah,
Did you?
so it was it Lynn, one of them, and I forget who it was, but they were talking about like their just like fear of bridges, like being on bridges at all.
Susan.
Was it Susan? Okay. I
Yeah.
have, yeah, and I couldn't tell like was that like because of like was that a fear before the bridge collapse, or did the bridge collapse like heighten that fear, like make it more of a realistic fear?
There were several people I think that we talked to that have a fear of bridges now, and a fear of water and things of that nature. Ones that come to mind mostly for me are certainly Susan, but also Denny. I mean, Denny talked about before he was the commission or the before he was the Mason County Visitors and Convention Bureau CEO. He had jobs where he was in sales and was commuting in different places. And one point in the book, during his interview, he talks about being on a bridge in New York, I think New York or New Jersey. And
Yeah, going like New Jersey, yeah,
yeah,
and he got out of it.
yeah, he got out and somebody asked, the taxi driver or the car driver said, what's wrong with him? And one of the other guys in the car said, well, he's from Point Pleasant. And the guy said, oh, because he knew then, because everybody was familiar with bridge disasters. So I know Susan talked about it. I know Denny talked about it. Did Linda mention that too? I don't remember.
I don't remember either. Possibly.
Yeah,
I think that all of them get nervous
yeah,
about crossing bridges.
about getting close to the water and stuff.
Hmm.
And I think that's one thing that you could, with all the different people that were there, that scene where it's just like super dark and you see the presence just, floating on the water and screaming and crying and emergency vehicles and just like chaos. Or they would talk about like they're going over the hill and they're like, where's the bridge? It's just gone. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to affect them a lot too. Just like, wow, something can be here. Like, they would say as a kid, you really don't think of it, but now you like take everything like nothing's promised.
You know,
Right.
it affected Jeff Walmsley for sure with the bridge being gone because he was a little boy. I think he was 6 years old or 5 years old when that happened. And he said that they left, like, if you ever saw a picture of the bridge, it's just like you see the sides and then there's nothing. It just like the ramp goes up in the air and then there's nothing. And they left that hole there for years. And he was like, during the interview, almost scratching his head. It's like, I don't understand why they did that, why they would have left that like that. Because it was really eerie. We have a picture of it that Linda Lane provided for us, and it is just really eerie. And it was just like this awful reminder of what had happened and that 46 people died when that bridge collapsed and they just didn't remove it.
Yeah, and that can't help people like, because obviously you're not going to get over what happened, but it's not going to help you like just grow and be able to like accept it in a way and just be able to go about your daily thing when you have that like tragic reminder just sitting across the river there.
Right.
Susan, I know she also like brought up military like running around after like these lights in the sky.
That was one of the most interesting aspects, I think, of the conversations we had with people who we interviewed, but also even going back to the Mothman prophecies and to what John Keel wrote about when he was on the spot, right there, basically, as it was all happening. Carolyn described to us, the lights in the sky, and she talked about how they were the most beautiful lights that she had ever seen, and couldn't even really describe them because the colors of the lights that she saw were ones that she wasn't familiar with and didn't really know how to talk about that. In the Mothman prophecies in the book, there's a chapter called Purple Lights and April Foolishness, and in that chapter of the book, Keel writes about being out with the local news reporter, a lady by the name of Mary Heyer, and the two of them would go out and do like little investigations and interview people about their experiences with the UFOs that they saw and the lights in the sky and Mothman and such. And at one point, they were out in the TNT area in a place called Camp Connolly Road. And this is a place where a lot of UFO sightings were happening back in the 60s. And as they were looking up at the sky, there was some type of aerial phenomena that was going on, some kind of lights. And Keel had one of these military grade flashlights, and he started kind of flashing a sequence of dots and dashes and this kind of a thing. And Mary said, "What are you doing?" And all of a sudden he noticed that this craft or light was kind of descending in a way that was like the falling leaf sensation that we're familiar with in the ufological community. And he had basically been doing Morse code and spelling out the word descend. And then it did just that. It descended. So there was just all kinds of weird stuff that was going on. But Denny talked about seeing lights in the sky. Linda talked about seeing lights in the sky. There was definitely stuff that was happening back then that was not really describable. You couldn't really define what was taking place, really.
Yeah, and like you say in the book, it's 13 months of UFO, Mothman, and Men in Black sightings that are going on. Now, I've obviously the lights and Mothman, but I never really knew about the Men in Black stuff. Like, so that was really intriguing. I guess maybe I wasn't as well researched in Mothman before reading your book. Like, like the basics, but like when you start expanding it, it's fascinating. But
Yeah, if you haven't read the Mothman prophecies, I don't know if you have or not,
mm-mm.
but it gives a wonderful background to pretty much all that stuff. Carolyn told us about the Men in Black. Can you describe what she told us about that?
It's just that she saw them. She said that she referred to them as government men. That's what she called them, government men. She said there were two types though, and the other type were different. And she said that they looked. I think I'm not 100% positive, but I think she said they had like a waxy look about them, that they didn't seem like that they were from here. So whatever that meant. I don't know that I asked her that at this time, but I remember her talking about them. She said, yeah, she saw them. She said that they would like stand in like the corners, like when you go down, like if you picture an old town and the old buildings that have like apartments above them, so there's doorways that kind of go back in when off the sidewalk. So you go up a few steps and you can stand, the doors there. They would stand back in areas like that, or they'd be around corners and things like that. And some of the people in town had some very strange visits from some of those men in black. According to Denny Bellamy, he said that he thought they were government people and he thought that they were there because West Virginia grows good pot.
He did. There were other things too, and in the people we interviewed, they talked about the Men in Black, but specifically, Keel wrote about the different episodes of people encountering Men in Black back in the 60s. And Mary Hyre, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, who was his assistant basically, or his co-conspirator, who was out and about, interviewing people and doing the investigations and such. She was approached in her newspaper office by a couple of really odd characters. And one of them who showed up was asking for directions to a different part of West Virginia and was asking really odd questions and was almost unintelligible in the way he was discussing things with her. And she described him as being really short, like less than 5 feet tall, and he had these thick glasses on. And if you look directly into his eyes, it almost hypnotized you. And she had said that he was, several feet away from her when he first came into the office. And before she knew it, after talking to him or listening to him, he was like right within striking distance of her. And she didn't even recall him walking towards her. He was just there. And he was really fascinated by like an ink pen, like a ballpoint pen.
Hmm.
And he picked it up and was just looking at it. And she said, do you want this? You can have this. And he looked at her and he laughed in some kind of a cackling laugh and took off and bolted out the door, and she never saw him again. So that was one instance of a man in black that Mary Hyre had. Now, Mary had a niece named Connie Carpenter, and Connie Carpenter was a young girl. She was, I think, 18 years old, very religious, and she was at church on a Sunday morning and was driving home from church. And as she was driving home from church, she saw Mothman during the day, went home, freaked out by that, obviously. But then within a day or two, she was out and about, and a late model car pulled up. And I think she said it was like a 58 or 57 model car, but it looked like it was brand new, like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. And there was a young man who was in the passenger seat, and he got her attention and started asking her questions. And as she leaned up next to the car, he tried to grab her arm and try to pull her into the car, and she was able to escape. And she went back to her apartment, slammed the door, and she didn't come out for several days. But according to Keel, she found a note underneath her door written in crayon that basically said, "You better watch it, girl. I can get you yet." So really weird stuff was going on, and it seemed that these Men in Black type characters were there to basically silence people who had seen things that they couldn't describe. whether it was UFOs or Mothman or what have you. And they were there to kind of shut that down and put the kibosh on whatever people were saying that they had seen.
Yeah, and I think that brings up like an interesting topic as far as what Mothman was, because obviously quite a few of the people, like the interviewees, were like, I never saw Mothman, or they didn't, seem too much concerned about Mothman. But then there's a bigger lore of like, was it something mutated? Obviously, going back to the TNT stuff, I know Denny said something about like a mutated like crane, because people were calling it the Big Bird and stuff. Or is it an alien, or like what? Like overall, what have you guys like come across like from people you've talked to, like their feelings on it?
Carolyn said that she thought it was an angel.
Okay.
Andy's got a whole different take on it. You want to tell him what Andy's take is? Andy
Well,
Colvin.
Andy's got all kinds of interesting things. Did you take many notes about Andy Colvin's interview?
I took some, but yeah, if you want to get into it.
So Andy is kind of a disciple of John Keel, which you can probably tell that we are too. And he actually had the opportunity to meet Keel in his last few years and correspond with him. And he told Keel that he wanted to write about his own childhood experiences because Andy and Harriet Plumbrook, who are in our book also, they're from the Charleston area, but they had instances of encounters with Mothman and strange phenomena themselves in that region during the same time things were going on in Point Pleasant. Now, Charleston's not horribly far from Point Pleasant, but it's not really within striking distance. It's about a 55-mile commute, but there were, according to Andy, just as many occurrences of Mothman taking place there. It just wasn't chronicled as much as it was in the Point Pleasant area because Keel didn't spend a lot of time there, and Mary Hyre was in Point Pleasant. So as Mary was capturing all the different interviews and Keel was working with her, the reportage of Mothman took place in Point Pleasant primarily, but things could have very easily been, the epicenter might have been Charleston too. We don't know. So Andy actually, he and his friends, Harriet and another guy by the name of Tommy, had built a shrine to Mothman back in 66, 67. And Mothman occurred to them, or basically presented to them. And as Andy approached, actually Tommy approached the shrine to Mothman, he had a vision of something going on that he couldn't really describe, but Andy came to later believe as he also walked into this area, he had this visage also of what looked like New York City in flames and burning. And so what he believes is they both saw a vision of 9/11 happening basically 35, 36 years before it took place. So in his eyes, and I don't want to put words in his mouth because he's not with us right now, but understanding what he's written, he's done a ton of research on Mothman himself. And like John Keel, they believe that Mothman was basically a transmogrification of energy. It presented to people along lines of their own belief systems. So if people were religious in nature, they would see it as either angelic or demonic based upon their thoughts of what it was doing there. But also that it could be some type of a manifestation of the Thunderbird or the Garuda, which is like the Thunderbird in more the Eastern tradition. So according to Andy and according to Keel, that Garuda is set to stabilize people as they go along on their paths, and it's really more of a harbinger and more of a protector deity. So he didn't see it as something that was there to cause harm, more of a matter of to kind of make straight the path, kind of like John the Baptist for Jesus in the New Testament. So he really sees it as more of a protector deity or something that's there to kind of straighten things out that are going wrong. And he brings in a whole conspiratorial aspect as to what was happening in the TNT area and what was happening in the greater world at that point in time. And he goes off in all different directions in his exploration of not only Mothman, but also the John F. Kennedy assassination. One of the reasons that the Mothman prophecies was named the prophecies is because Keel received prophecies about the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King and of Bobby Kennedy. And he tried to be able to warn them about the fact that he was getting these messages. He was never really able to pass that along. So I know that's a lot of information in a real short period of time and goes off in different directions, but it's a fascinating study and a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, no, and I was one of the notes was about the shrine. I didn't know if you know more about that, but yeah, I know like in the book you talk about like how the stories seem to have found their ways into like X-Files, Twin Peaks, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which are all interesting. Close Encounters is a movie we've talked about mainly because of J. Allen Hynek and like his work behind the scenes, helping Spielberg kind of tweak that to get that right as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's one thing I know we've been talking about that's not related to the book, but it is related to Mothman because there is so many sightings of like flying creatures, not just limited to West Virginia, but like Pennsylvania. You go to Chicago, I know Mothman's been like purported on the Sears Tower. Do you think it's all the same creature, or do you think people are just like associating it with Mothman because that's like the best known thing out there?
I think we've got a whole different take on a lot of that than what is out there in public consciousness right now. I do think that there's very possible manifestations of similar energies, or maybe the same creatures, or what have you, as to what was experienced in Point Pleasant, taking place in other places in the world. Being that we're close to Chicago, we're 60 miles away from there. When we went in 2016 to Point Pleasant, and it was, like I mentioned, kind of like a mountaintop type experience. We're right here in the epicenter. It's like going to Mecca if you're Islamic, or going out to Roswell if you're really into that kind of a thing. In fact, Point Pleasant is referred to now as the Roswell of the East because it's really the biggest paranormal thing that on that side of the country, and that's the only scale you can really compare it to. But we were really super interested in what was happening in Chicago because it's right close to us. Point Pleasant is a 500-mile drive for us, and that's kind of tough for a couple of middle-aged folks with a couple dogs now. It's hard to get out there a lot. But so when we went to a mutual UFO network meeting, a MUFON meeting in the Rockford area, which is about 100 miles west of Chicago, but like a 150,000 person city. It's a good sized town. We had the good fortune to meet a gentleman by the name of Sam Moranto, who is the UFO or the MUFON director for the state of Illinois, and also met Jim Peniston, who is the Rendlesham Forest guy. He's of our area as well too, so we got connected to him too. But I approached Sam, and when I first met him, and we talked a little bit about the whole MUFON thing and UFOs and this, and I told him, I said, really, I'm more interested in the whole Mothman thing. And he said, well, I've been the lead investigator for the Chicagoland Mothman sightings, and so we need to talk. So he and I became very good friends, and Jackie and Sam's wife, the four of us, we were kind of like, they were our go-to couple for a short period of time, and we got together and exchanged a lot of information. But I don't know if you've followed the Small Town Monsters videos or not, but there is one that came out I guess about a year ago now, called On the Trail of the Lake Michigan Mothman. And that's one that Sam and a guy by the name of Jack Chavez were able to be in. And I had a very short piece in that myself. But Sam has done extensive research into the Chicago sightings, and we're not so sure that they're legitimate. We don't necessarily believe that they are. Without getting too far into it, I do think something has been going on in the Chicago area. I don't really know what it is. I think there have been a lot of sightings and misidentifications of birds and such, and maybe some paranormal activity as well. But a lot of the sightings seem to be very suspect. A lot of the reports are very, very similar in nature. A lot of the style metrics of the writings seem to be coming from the same places, from the same people, even from the same IP addresses. And Sam's got a lot more information on that. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that, Mrs. Kousoulas?
Same what you said. I mean,
I
you
mean,
just basically said it all. What I will say is like the Sears Tower. If you've never been to Chicago, the Sears Tower is tall. You would not even know if something was on top of the Sears Tower. And to make it a statement that you saw anything up there is very far fetched. Also, when there was a report of a Mothman sighted at the USPS facility near O'Hare Airport. As a postmaster, I had access to data that people just don't have access to. So without having to do a FOIA request or anything like that, I was able to pull information and also speak with people from the plant, speak with supervisors from the plant. I mean, so nobody heard anything about it. If that literally was a true thing, that an employee was leaving in the middle of the night, had a 7-foot creature, winged creature outside scaring the hell out of them, there would have been massive action in our district for employee safety, if nothing else. There would have been cameras placed in other facilities that don't have them on in the parking lots. Nothing like that was ever even heard of, by supervisors at the plant. So that one I know was whoever reported it. I don't know why they would have reported it as an employee of USPS, because I doubt very much they didn't go back into work and say, I had the shit scared out of me last night and I'm not leaving work by myself anymore.
Yeah.
That's just, I mean, a female, they would have. Even a guy would have done it. I mean, so yeah, I think there's a lot of really weird stuff going on in Chicago. I don't know that it's Mothman related. I think it's more paranormal. I think it's just real, like an extreme that when you start connecting dots of the reports and the places and all this other stuff, there is such high strangeness with all of it that if somebody is trying to manipulate something with reporting in Chicago, they don't even know what's going on. It's almost like it has grabbed hold of the story itself and is forming it into something even stranger, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I would say too, if I could piggyback on that, Sam is a friend of ours, Sam Moranto. And if you folks were interested in having a conversation with him, he could really go in depth into what he's learned about what's been reported in the Chicago area without going too deeply into it. As we've given you a little bit, he would really be one that I would recommend that you have a conversation with. And I would think he'd be happy to talk about it. One thing that I want to share also is that I've been more than skeptical for a couple of different reasons. Number one, being so passionate and involved in the Point Pleasant area Mothman, where there were between 100 and 200 people who came forward back in the 1960s in the Bible Belt, where people had a lot to lose in terms of credibility by saying who they were and what they had seen. You still had young folks like the Scarberrys and the Millettes, who were the couple who were in the vehicle in the TNT area, came forward, gave their names, went to the police, told their stories. And then you had other people that talked about their reporting of Mothman instances here and there too. What I've seen in the Chicago area sightings is that for some reason, and I think I know what the reason is, there are 3 websites that all this traffic's been driven to. And the gentlemen who have published books that came out on the 50th anniversary of the Silver Bridge collapse, which I think was a big marketing ploy, capitalized upon what they said and would not give out the names of anybody. Nobody was ever released, so nobody could cross-examine anyone. And the story that's been told basically is that we're not going to give these names out because these people are going to lose credibility. Come on, guys. This is 2020, 2023 now. You're telling me that people who basically post pictures of what they have on Facebook for dinner, they're throwing all their information out there. They're talking about their love lives. They're in a complicated relationship. People are talking about all this stuff all the time. Now in 2023 in liberal Chicago, people are afraid that they're going to lose credibility by telling people that they've seen Mothman when people in the 60s in the Bible Belt were okay doing it. I just don't buy it. It just doesn't add up to me.
Yeah, no
Yeah,
doubt.
no.
We would definitely love to go in more depth and talk to Sam. My family, my great papu and my yaya moved from Greece to Chicago. Oh, what was it, 1915, I believe. He came over by himself after there was the skirmish between Turkey and Greece, and then they moved there. And uh, his restaurant is gone, but the building's still there on Clark Street. And so even though I'm skeptical with all the sightings I have, it's not stopped me from trying to get these guys to go just to go back to the Sears Tower because I can spend all day. I love that building and just the
Sure.
views. I know my anti-rain was like, we spent 4 hours here. Like, this is ridiculous.
So did I hear that you're Greek also?
Yes. Yeah.
So my father is actually in Greece right now.
Oh,
He
really?
lives in Schaumburg, Illinois. He has a home in Schaumburg, which is about 45 minutes in towards the city from where we live, but he also has a home in Greece. So he
Okay.
goes there as well. And obviously my last name is Greek
Mhm.
as well. Quick side, we've got a couple of lab puppies that are waking up right now. Do you mind if I go silent for a minute and let them out? Because they're in their kennels. They've been napping.
Yeah, that's fine.
Go for it.
I'll go ahead and mute myself and turn my video off temporarily.
Okay. While you're doing that, I'm gonna go get a quick drink of water then. because I ran out and I want to be able to keep talking. So give me 1 second.
Makes me wonder. Do you know if there's been any sightings near Long Island? I know they're gone, but I'm just curious about that.
Long Island. I don't know if there were or not.
Okay.
But is Mount Misery near there?
Let me look. Apparently, we have a Mount Misery in Colorado, which is definitely not what I was looking for.
Sorry about that. Just wanted to get some water. My throat. It's been kind of dry with the winter out here,
Yeah.
so. But yeah, see, I have like the model of the Sears Tower.
Ah, yeah.
No, thank you for coming on. I know
Right.
before you got on, I was talking a little bit with Bill about it, and this book was so fascinating. And right when Mark kind of like was describing some different ones, you guys were the first on my list that I wanted to talk to. Like, it was just such a unique and different, like I said, take on it. Like, it was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, Bill's not like so much into paranormal stuff like I am. I've had, I'm an experiencer. I've had paranormal stuff happening ever since I can remember. So to me, it's just like that's what life is. When things happen, it's like you just kind of like that's odd. Like the other day, I mean, when I put the puppies in their kennels in the afternoons for their nap, I turn Alexa on to meditation music. And the
Mhm.
other day, there was like this noise that came over and it sounded like gremlins. You ever see the movie The Gremlins and they like do that chatter kind of thing, that
Yeah.
noise? And then the meditation music would play, like instrumentals, and then it started doing that again. And the dog even barked at Alexa on the second one, and I'm like, what the hell's that? And then I'm like, okay, whatever, it's something. But we just built a brand new house and we've got weird crap happening here. I mean, weird. And Bill actually heard voices coming out of the floor in the basement with me the other day. So it's like, okay, so now you know. Now you heard it too. Now you know. It's not just me. I'm not crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we started out as a paranormal group because we had our experiences, and but I think we were always kind of a weird paranormal group because we were still kind of highly skeptical all
Yeah.
the time. But I guess you kind of have to be.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we've just kind of morphed over time into like history and like all these different topics. Like I said, Billy the Kid. We've gone on JFK, like gone down to Dallas and filmed down there and
Yeah.
stuff. So
That's cool.
yeah.
Yeah. There's so much stuff to. I mean, you could just go so many places because there's just so much stuff. You know. Um, I I recently learned that I am a relative of um, oh now it's gonna slip my mind. Jesse James.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. So now
Like
it's
outlaw Jesse James?
yes. So
Okay,
now
so that's really weird because on my mom's side, because my dad's side's the Greek side.
yeah,
On my mom's side are the James and the Fords,
yeah,
and obviously the James side is Jesse James, with our Ford side, because they ended up marrying, was Robert Ford's side of the family. And so yeah, we have old tintypes and photos.
do you really?
Yeah,
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, that is funny.
My family's the same way. My dad is from the old country. My mom is 100% American.
Yeah, yeah. My dad's side's Greek, and they all were Chicago area. A lot of them are still out there, or at least in Indiana. Like they didn't go too far. And then my mom's side came over and kind of just moved west, I guess, out to here and stuff. So yeah. And I know we haven't heard from Sam, so I'm gonna let Sam kind of talk a little bit. And then
Yeah.
he can ask you some of his questions because I know he listened. Mark sent an interview. We listened to that and uh, been watching a lot of different Mothman stuff to try to get up to date and ask some good questions. So, Sam?
So a couple of my questions. Sorry, I was trying to look up where Mount Misery is, but it keeps sending me to Colorado for some reason. There have been sightings of like flying crafts and Mothman at the same time, or have they been like mostly separate?
Are you talking about Mount Misery specifically?
Oh no, not Mount Misery specifically. I was kind of looking towards that because I was trying to figure out if Long Island has seen anything from Mothman, just because I kind of was thinking of like maybe a theory of where it may have, like, if it was something that was kind of escaped from a government facility, where it could have potentially came from. Because I looked up where like the location of Plum Island is, and Plum Island back in the time used to be like a kind of like a research facility, and there's been like cases of stuff like washing up on the beach that have been like kind of misshapen and like things that shouldn't have been released. But Plum Island used to be like this like research facility for like experimental things, where like they would experiment with like animals and humans and some other stuff, which then they eventually like closed down that facility, and then they popped up a bunch more like throughout the states, which was kind of weird. But like they always have like weird sightings around that, like from those facilities. But like I did look up that it was like 124 miles from Pleasant Point, or Point Pleasant. And so I'm wondering if maybe it like potentially escaped there and then like kind of flew over that way. More like a really in-depth kind of theory there.
No, and that's okay. I think what's interesting is you started off with Mount Misery, and Mount Misery is spoken to very prominently in the Mothman prophecies. It's John Keel was from New York, and Mount Misery is on Long Island. Interestingly enough,
Oh, perfect.
we met a gentleman at the Mothman Festival named Anthony Holmes. And Anthony is, he's an expert when it comes to the Amityville horror. He actually knew Ed and Lorraine Warren really very well. And he was telling us that Amityville is like literally, I think, a couple miles away from where Mount Misery is. And Mount Misery being spoken to very heavily by John Keel in the Mothman prophecies, especially the second half of it. He talks a lot about a lady who was, she was a talk radio show host by the name of J.P. Perro. J. Perro. That was her stage name, but her real name was Joanne Ferrano. But she interviewed all kinds of people in the Long Island area in the same time as the Mothman prophecies and all those things were happening in Point Pleasant. And there were all kinds of different people that were showing up. Keel referred to them as kooks and crackpots, people who really believed this whole alien thing. And one of them was Princess Moon Owl, and she was somebody who showed up and said she was from a different planet. And there were all kinds of different instances of people that were really involved in this whole Mount Misery thing. Andy Colvin put a book together that he released, I think in 2018 or 2019, called The Big Blackout. And The Big Blackout basically is comprised of John Keel's field notes when he was investigating a little bit in Point Pleasant, but really during the same time frame at Mount Misery. And he talks about like an alien conspiracy, and he'd been a part of these different secret meetings where these people who were either androids or aliens or what have you were having all these different meetings about how they were going to disclose that they were actually here. And they were asking Keel for his input. And so it seems like kind of a far-fetched tale, really. And Joanne Ferrano, or J.P. Perro, is very central to it. It's worth picking up and taking a look at. To me, I kind of think that The Big Blackout could almost be a comparison or like a companion to the Mothman prophecies, because it talks about what was going on specific to Long Island at the same time as the Mothman was going on. So I'm not sure if I answered your question directly. It's just some experience that I have from reading both of those books and talking to people that are involved with that kind of thing.
Kind of adds to like potentially the theory of that, though. So yeah, in a way, you kind of did. That's very interesting, though, because I think I do remember a bit about like the blackout, and like there was like definitely a lot of sightings around there as well.
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you can continue. I'm just thinking. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was going to say, Keel really thought that a lot of the messages he was getting, like what I was talking about earlier, messages of impending doom or people were going to be assassinated, or then he thought there was going to be a big blackout. He thought that when Lyndon Johnson on December 15th in Washington, D.C., flipped the switch for the Christmas tree to come on, the White House lawn Christmas tree, that the power was going to go out, because he kept getting these convoluted messages from these different entities. One of them went by the name APOL. Jay Perro would call him, and then she'd either start channeling this APOL person who was giving him all kinds of different prophecies, or she'd actually hand the phone to this guy and he'd start telling Keel about all these things. Well, one of the messages was that there was going to be a huge blackout in the northeast part of the country, and it was going to be really devastating to the economy and to the people when all the light went out, the power went out, people couldn't move commerce or do business or what have you. And so when Lyndon Johnson turned the power basically for the Christmas tree to come on, Keel was watching TV and the Christmas tree came on and he was happy about that. He's like, oh, what a relief, what a relief. And then shortly after that, there was a crawl at the bottom of the screen of the TV that said, bridge has collapsed in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And then he just put two and two together and realized that some of the messages he was receiving, because he was receiving a lot of messages of this impending disaster, but couldn't put his name on it, couldn't put his stamp on it. He thought a power plant was going to blow up, like a chemical plant or something in Point Pleasant. The bridge actually went down, and he really held himself responsible for not knowing that. Not like you can't ever really know something like that's going to happen, but because of all these different messages, he thought he should have been able to put two and two together, figure out what's going to happen, and then save the community and all the lives that were lost. But I mean, you just can't do that.
No, that'd be too difficult. That's too much pressure.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I guess we'll go back to the first one. Has Mothman been seen with like crafts around it as well, or has it been like separated to where it's
Somebody
like
reported something, and this is back in 66, 67. I'm trying to remember where I got this from, but I had heard that somebody reported that they saw a Mothman flying up to a UFO and then the UFO taking off. But I don't remember where I heard that from or who allegedly said that.
Interesting.
I think we heard that on a MUFON meeting with Margie, because there's reports of Mothman in Missouri, Kansas line, and I think that's where that report came from, that the Mothman was seen flying up to a UFO and then taking off with it. But that wasn't 66, 67. That was in the last 5 years or so.
But I think that would be in addition to something that was reported from West Virginia from that time frame as well. I don't know if you guys know who Margie Kay is. Margie is she's the deputy state director for MUFON in the state of Missouri. Okay. And I think she runs the KUNX radio station, internet radio station. She interviews all kinds of different personalities on there, but she's written a couple of books, one of them about winged cryptids or Mothman type creatures. She released just a couple of years ago.
Okay, we'll definitely have to check those out. Yeah. I mean, we've heard of MUFON. I mean, I've definitely heard of that at least. So, I mean, I'll kind of get back to the study, because, I mean, you guys had the 11 participants. Do you want to kind of talk about how you picked them out, or what you were looking for when you had these 11?
Sure. In scientific methodology, the way that you could refer to what we did was a technique called snowball sampling, which basically, if you take the analogy of like a snowball, if it's rolling downhill, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, picks up things around it. So there were 3 guys that we wanted to contact because they're very central to the whole Mothman mythos, so to speak, and central to the Point Pleasant area. And that was, we mentioned Andy Colvin, who goes by the name the Mothman's photographer, and has published tons and tons of books about the topic. Another gentleman by the name of Jeff Wamsley, who we talked about, he runs the Mothman Museum. He's become a good friend of ours the last few years. And then another guy by the name of Steve Ward. And Steve is kind of a John Keel historian who now works for the Mothman Museum, but wasn't then. He was living in Michigan at the time, but he's really kind of central. He's kind of like we are. I mean, he's really, really into this stuff. He's very passionate about it. And we met him in Point Pleasant, so we got to know him a little bit, and we're able to do a couple radio shows with him. He has a different network he's a part of as well. But Paranormal UK, I think, is what that is. But in any event, we contacted the 3 of them, and we didn't necessarily ask them to be in the study. We asked them if they knew of people who would be interested in being in the study. And that kind of got us along the path of, what do we do next? We got to be friends with Andy and his friend Harriet through Zoom meetings. We do Zoom meetings with Andy every Thursday, where we just sit and visit. It's kind of like a cocktail hour type thing now. We talk some paranormal, usually just goofing around and having fun. but he ended up volunteering for the study. Harriet volunteered for the study. We didn't ask Jeff because Jeff is so busy with what he's got going on, and he works full time, so he's running this whole Mothman business, which is crazy busy. And he also works as a graphic arts instructor at a vocational school in Point Pleasant. He volunteered once we started getting more people. He's like, I'll be in the study. We thought, okay, that's cool. I mean, because he's really very, very central to the whole thing. So that's how we got those three, Andy, Harriet, and Jeff. We also talked to Jeff's daughter, Ashley, who has a business in town called Counterpoint Cooperative, where she sells things that are West Virginia memorabilia type things and a little bit of Mothman, like Jackie was talking about. But I got a hold of her over Facebook Messenger, and we knew her because we'd met her a few times. And I said, we're looking for more volunteers. Do you know of anybody? She said, why don't you get a hold of Beth Surgent? She runs the newspaper in town. So we contacted Beth Surgent and then kind of put together, what our thought was, showed her the methodology that we were going to do. And we had a conference call with her. And talking to her, she said, I see you want to talk to people about the Silver Bridge and you want to talk about Mothman. And she said, you got to be really careful with that. She said, you don't want to offend the people here. This is still very personal. People have suffered tremendous loss. Yeah, it's over 50 years since this bridge went down, but people still hurt. So you need to be very mindful of that. So, don't you dare combine the two of them. So in conversation with her for, I don't know, maybe 40 minutes or so, we convinced her that we had the right motives. We weren't there to exploit anybody. And we certainly weren't going to say, something that wasn't accurate in terms of the people's representations of their experience. So she actually took a little bit of what we sent her in terms of our research plan and then turned it into an article. She put it on the front cover of the Point Pleasant Register and the other newspapers that she managed. I think there are 3 altogether. And she kicked it out as a front page thing that even extended onto another page. And we were floored. And when I asked her, how much do we owe you? She just shook her head, said nothing. So she didn't charge us a dime for this front page ad. We had 3 people, I think it was 3 people that came forward from that ad. The first one was Jimmy Wedge. And when Jimmy called me, I grabbed the phone and started talking with him. He says, yeah, my name's Jimmy Wedge. He had a thick Southern accent. And he said, I lost both my parents in the bridge disaster. And I was immediately kind of like, oh my goodness, this is serious. This guy lost both his mom and his dad in a bridge disaster. So we coordinated an interview with him. And then as we got to Point Pleasant, we got a couple more phone calls while we were there to do the interviews. Thankfully, 2 other ladies came forward. Linda Lane came forward, and then Charlene Westwood came forward. And so because of that ad, we got Jimmy, we got Linda, we got Charlene. Mark Griffith connected us with Rick Handley. That's how we got Rick to do the interview. Honey, who am I missing here?
Charlene.
I mentioned Charlene. Marva, I didn't mention Marva. Linda Lane, who came because of the result of the article, was really nervous to do the interview. She didn't want video on, and she was kind of hesitant in the way that when we interviewed her, she was kind of short answers until towards the end of the interview, when we did a recap for her of how we would have felt if we were approaching the bridge. And then she really gave us a wonderful story after that of having actually gone into shock and flatlining 3 times as a result of losing her brother-in-law and the trauma that caused as an 18-year-old, if you can imagine. She had Marva come as well too. So Mark, Susan, Linda, Denny Bellamy, we contacted him directly, and he was all for it because Denny loves to talk. And so he joined as a result of that. And then after that, I guess there was Andy and Harriet and Marva and Charlene and Jeff Wamsley. I think that rounds out the 11. So that's how we got the participants.
Okay, yeah, definitely. When you were, or I was reading Denny's portion, yeah, it definitely seemed like he was really just energetic and like very happy to talk. He was talking about all the different, movies or films or places that, popped up because of Mothman or, Josh Gates and stuff like that. So, yeah, no, that was fascinating. I'm trying to like not go too much spoilers as far as because I know you got your conclusions and the analysis. So I'm trying to like tiptoe around that because I want people to actually go read your book. so, um, so I guess without getting too much spoilers and trying to just entice some of the viewers, can you explain maybe some pros and cons as far as how people grew from this experience?
Well, obviously, when people die, it's going to cause other people tremendous loss. God, the person who passed away, they lost their life, but that person was a father or a mother or a sister or a daughter or a son or a nephew of other people. So all those other folks were affected by that as well too. I have no problem sharing what the dimensions of post-traumatic growth are. I don't mind doing that at all.
Okay.
If you'd like me to, I'll go ahead and just list them.
Okay. Yeah. I wasn't sure because I was like, I want to make sure people are actually going and buying.
Oh, well, and here's the thing, Keegan. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the results are one thing. It's the stories that are the most valuable part of the whole study. The people's interviews are the part that I think are really the meat and potatoes really of the book. So to share with what happened in terms of the development, how we arrived at that, and we laid out the methodology and showed the tables and showed the process of how this all developed. And I hope people find that interesting, not too boring. But the things that we found were appreciation for life, sense of community, entrepreneurialism, family, gratitude, memorial, optimism, patience. People are on bridges and people are fixing bridges. You're patient. Denny told us about that. Perseverance, personal development, perspective taking, positive reflections, preparedness, responsibility, and spiritual development. Those are the things that we found. Those were the elements of post-traumatic growth that we were able to find. But again, I mean, to me, the meat and potatoes and the best part of the book are those interviews. That's the most important part.
And that's where you'll find the cons. When you talk about the pros and the cons, he just read what the pros were and the stuff that got them there. Like when Jimmy Joe Wedge lost both of his parents, and he said that he didn't have anybody to run things past anymore. You know, he got his advice from his parents, and they were gone. He didn't have that. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff in their stories.
Yeah, no, a lot of the stories, I mean, some of them were just like, it was there. We kind of briefly knew people or, we knew that name. But then, yeah, you had those stories where it was like, who was it that they had to take on their siblings, two kids?
Linda.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, that, as a single dad myself, I mean, that hits me hard, so.
And we just spoke with her sister, and she shared her story with us. And she was the sister that had the child whose husband was overseas, so she was staying with them. And her story is a totally different perspective. So when we put out the second edition, we're going to add that to the book in the appendix. And we won't be able to use, we won't be able to do an analysis on it, but it'll be part of it. So you can see another person's perspective that literally lived in the same house and they both saw their brother suffer, but his wife was gone, So they both have their stories to share on this exact same event and how it affected them differently.
Yeah, we literally just talked to her last Sunday. I've been communicating with her over Facebook for a while. She had shared with me that she had bought the book. I don't do math real well, so it took me a while to get two and two and put them together and realize she's actually Linda's sister. I knew that she was a friend and from the Point Pleasant community, but I didn't realize that she was her sister. But her story, and she kind of put it into a narrative for us, it's like 2 or 3 pages long, is tremendous. And it's going to put a real exclamation point on the whole thing. Obviously, we've already done the analysis. We can't redo the study, but we're going to add an appendix at the end of it to give her story and talk about post-traumatic growth, almost of an extra, how would you call it, like a paranormal nature, positive paranormal correlations that came forward in her life on the day of December 15th to really bring the bridge disaster into more of a positive light. It's amazing. I can't wait to put that in and get that second edition out.
No, that sounds fascinating. When do you guys think that'll be out?
We were hoping January, but then I've had a little bit of health trouble since then. That's really slowed us down entirely. So I know we've gone through, we've done a lot of editing of the original version of the book because frankly we found some typos and grammatical errors that I'm not real proud of. So we found those. We're not really rewriting anything. We're just kind of cleaning up the text as far as that's concerned. But we're going to put some pictures into the next edition. We already have those pictures. We just need to throw everything into InDesign and then upload it into Amazon again, and then add that last story. So I guess realistically, maybe sometime towards the end of March, we should have that out.
Well, we'll definitely look forward to it. I'm interested to see that story and some of the pictures that you guys will have in there then.
Absolutely. We loved the study. It was a real passion for us going out to Point Pleasant, meeting these people, hearing their stories, and then putting it together in a way to be able to illustrate how much good came from that horrible negative experience of the bridge disaster, and then to have some Mothman in there as well too. That's always fun.
The cool
Right.
thing is it just didn't happen to these people in their own personal lives. You know, it also happened to the entire communities of Point Pleasant and Gallipolis, Ohio. So that's that's something I don't think people really think about when they think about, you know, you see growth in your own life. Some people like continue to grow and do better as they grow older, and other people just continually go downhill until they just die. But then there's towns. Towns die, and some prosper, and so it gives that perspective too, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that part was fascinating, like I said earlier, where like without the bridge collapsing, would they still have rerouted it like they did, and would, you know, that town have risen up or would it have been another town? And yeah, that was interesting. And yeah, no, the interviews as well, like even from the first one, like I was hooked. Like it was just so fascinating to hear it and just see the questioning of like, okay, just go a little bit more detail there, and then they would talk, and then it Linda that she was the one that like passed out and like had CPR and stuff,
Yeah.
where like at first she didn't like remember it, and then through the questioning, like it just brought that back up because obviously her memory had suppressed that, so she didn't, because it's traumatic, obviously.
Yeah,
So I think
that
you
was
guys
one.
did a fantastic job.
Thank you. That was one of the more powerful moments in the book, was when Linda recalled all that, and then we're thinking, "Holy cow, what happened? You weren't even conscious of this until we started talking about it." Which is, I mean, it talks about how, I mean, you talk about how the mind has defense mechanisms and can hide things from us and compartmentalize it in ways that it needs to get through certain things. But then when it buries it, that's going to be driving other behaviors later on in life, and the post-traumatic, stress that we talk about. If that's just lying there and never dealt with, it can really manifest in harmful ways. That was one of the, like I say, one of the big, I was really super pleased with that, to learn that from her and to be a part of bringing that out.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that was like something just life changing for you guys too, because like just being able to help somebody recall something like that and maybe find some closure in that event, you know.
She's become a good friend of ours. We
Mhm.
actually, the night before the Mothman Festival, we were out on the Ohio River on the Gallipolis side. Andy was with us. He drove his 72 Survivor Chevelle all the way from where he lives in Columbus, Ohio, and he hung out with us. And we met on the banks of the river with Linda Lane and with Marva Bailey. So the five of us were right there. That was a real cool moment for us. And then going into the festival the next day, which was just amazing. That was just an outstanding time for us.
Yeah, what is the festival like? Because like we've experienced Roswell and it has like music and guest speakers and some events and drones, baseball games and stuff. But what's the Mothman one like?
Go ahead, wife of mine.
Oh, well, you were there too. It's like that. There's music down by the river. They have music playing throughout the day, throughout the weekend. Actually, there were some. I think there were actually carnival rides, but I'm not positive because I didn't get that far down on the street. But when I looked down the street, it looked like there was some activities going on that were like that. There were a lot of food trucks. There was the whole street where we were, that was the author's street. We were across from in our tent, we were across from Lyle Blackburn. Ken Gearhart was next to him. Nick Redfern was next to him. Beside us was George Dunning, who's written tons of books, or Dunning, who's written tons of books on West Virginia. And then Mark Randall, who does a lot of photography, beautiful photography, was next to him. And then who was there was no one next to him. Someone was supposed to be there, but they weren't there.
Dave Spinks was supposed to
Yeah,
be there,
Dave
but he wasn't
Spinks.
there.
So yeah, I mean, lots of fun, lots of people dressed up in costumes. We were like on the back side of the Mothman statue, so we got to watch people proposing to each, to their or to their boyfriend or girlfriend or their whatever. They were just like, there was people literally proposing. Whenever you hear a big cheer in the whole line at the Moth, which was a long line, you knew somebody just got engaged. So I mean, it was just that's how it is. It's a really well put together. And the line to the Mothman Museum was, if you want to see the Mothman Museum, do not go during the festival. Either go several days before, like get there a few days before the festival or stay days after to go to the museum, because even when we went to the festival that didn't happen in 2021 because of COVID, there was still like a couple thousand people in town just for that. So if you really want to spend some time in the museum, that's one thing you will not want to do during the festival. There's hay rides, a hayride that takes you out to the TNT area. You can do it at day or you can do it at night. There's reenactments at Fort Randall, a battle of the Revolutionary War, and so there's just a lot of stuff going on. Just a lot of stuff going on.
And we didn't see any of it because we were in our tent the whole time. I mean,
I
really,
saw
we loaded everything up, and we actually had a bunch of books shipped to the Mothman Museum, and we were right outside of the Mothman Museum. And from the get-go, like within probably 45 minutes, all of a sudden it was Grand Central Station, and the rush was on, and we're selling books and autographing this and doing this and that. And I mean, it was like just a barrage of activity that hit us probably mostly in the morning and the early afternoon on Saturday. It kind of petered out a little bit towards the end of the day. And then we were the last speakers of the day. We went right after Anthony Holmes and his wife presented their findings on the Amityville horror. And we had our findings that we presented for the festival right after that. And things were kind of starting to wind down for us then. Sunday was much quieter than Saturday was, but we didn't really get a whole lot of chance to venture out because the whole time we were kind of manning the book stand and pitching for our whole thing.
Faye DeWitt was there, and I wanted to see Faye DeWitt. She's in a lot of the documentaries. She was a young girl, and she literally saw Mothman, and her brother was driving the car. So she was someone I really wanted to see, and I didn't get a chance to see her. But we also saw Tyler Strand. If you ever watched the Hellier series, Tyler Strand is in there. He walked past, and my husband said, "Did you see Tyler Strand walk past?" I'm like, "No!" But when he walked past again, I got his attention, and we got to talk to him for a while. So, I mean, there's just all sorts of people there, just all sorts of people. So, and I'm sure it's like that at Roswell too, which I would like to go there someday. Keep that in mind, hubby.
Yeah, no, the Roswell was fun. We last year when we went, because it's 3 days, right, Sam?
Yes.
Yeah, and so we got to meet John LeMay, who's an author that we've become friends with, and he does a lot of Billy the Kid stuff. But then we got to meet like Travis Walton, Jesse Marcel, Stanton Friedman's daughters, and so yeah, it was really really fun. But yeah, because it was funny when reading your book, it would mention like Roswell's the West, this is the East. I'm like, oh no, we gotta go, like, because it just sounds so much fun. And like you said, there's that part too where what's the restaurant name, Piggly, where somebody was like, park behind there because you won't find parking.
Weekly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 But they're like, that's only during you can park right up front now. Like it's
Yeah, and that's
like,
the thing, guys. We had never been to the festival before. This is our first festival, but we've been to Point Pleasant every year since 16, at least once, if not twice during the year. And I never thought that we go to the festival because I'm not like a big crowds guy. Jackie loves it. She just thrives in environments like that. I typically don't, but we had a lot of fun there. But going in the off hours, you get a chance to have conversations with people at length where you can actually move around without tripping all over a massive crowd. And going into the museum, if you even have a passing interest in Mothman, it's so fascinating because they actually have all kinds of memorabilia from the Mothman Prophecies movie. They have all kinds of pictures and photographs of Men in Black. They have the original 13 pages of documentation that Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette gave to Deputy Millard Halstead when they were basically giving their story of what they had seen. All those pages I think they're the originals. They're right there in the museum. Jeff has done a tremendous, tremendous job of building that thing into just a wonderful place. Gift shop is in the front. They've got hoodies, they've got t-shirts, they've got baseball caps, they've got all kinds of books. Our book is even being sold there, which is super exciting to us. But it's just a tremendous experience, guys. I would recommend that next time you get a chance to get out and do something like that, check it out. You won't regret it.
yeah, no, it's definitely been moving higher and higher up on our list. Like, do you know what days usually the festival is? Or like, is it like summertime, like June, July, or something?
It's the third week of September, third weekend of September, Saturday and Sunday.
Okay, well that would be good because I know Roswell's the first week because it's like July 1st through 3rd. So that's good because then they wouldn't like contradict. So
If
yeah,
you
well,
want a hotel room, you're too late for next year already.
Yeah.
Because they're
Yeah.
booked up that far in advance. But there's the Chief Cornstalk camping ground that's out in the TNT area, which you can camp at. There's also copperheads out there. But I mean, there are camping areas that they are opening up now. They stopped opening them up for a while, but they reopened them this last festival, which is a good thing because some people have to drive 100 miles from their hotel just to get to the Mothman Festival.
We actually stayed. Where did we stay the year before? Because where?
Ripley.
Yeah, Ripley was over 50 miles away from Point Pleasant. We stayed there in 2021 because we couldn't reserve the place we like to go to. We typically stay in Gallipolis. What's that hotel there that we all stay at?
Hampton.
The Hampton Inn. Yeah, we usually stay there.
Yeah, when we did Roswell last time, we just did a Airbnb. So luckily we were right in town. But yeah, otherwise like it's hard because everything else is like an hour, hour plus away.
That's
Sure.
the horrible thing about Point Pleasant. Nobody has Airbnbs. Although Denny did say that he's going to build some cabins on his property. He's going to build 4 cabins out there. I don't know if he started that project yet or not, but those will be gone in no time too.
I
Yeah.
think that's in the book too, isn't it? Him talking about that.
I don't know if it is or not.
He definitely told. Well, we spent like the whole day with Denny. It was crazy. We went to his place of business and sat down with him for an hour before we even started questioning, and he was just going on and on and on. And it was so much fun. And then we went to the formal interview, and that took an hour. So that's why his is longer than like everybody else's is. But then he invited us out to his house just to go out and sit out in the woods with him and have a beer or a pop or whatever and just visit. We were with him and just him until his wife came home, and she's a critical care nurse. And then she came home, and that was during the whole COVID thing. So she was all stressed out. And so she was visiting with us as well. But you could tell she needed to kind of detox from her day and just kind of like get a bunch of things off of her chest. But we were with them till 11 o'clock at night. So really from, I don't know, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 11 o'clock at night. And we just met the guy. It was an amazing experience. It was a lot of fun.
It was amazing to see all the stars. It had been forever since I've seen stars like that. So it was really, really cool to be out in the middle of the dark woods in West Virginia and be able to look up and see that again. I didn't see UFOs. I was pretty mad about that. I wanted to see some UFOs, but
Yeah, no, I can only imagine the East Coast, like the forests out there, are like a completely different thing. I went to school in Louisville. Like my dad lived in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, and man, it's just so forestry and just like there's like nothing out there. And so yeah, the stars are just beautiful out there.
Yeah, West Virginia is like that too. I mean, that whole region of the United States is just gorgeous.
Yeah, it's definitely a contrast. I know in Roswell it's pretty deserty, but if you ever get out there, I'd say go visit Bottomless Lakes. It's quite beautiful. We went out there. You can camp at the lakes and stuff, but I mean, I'll show you a picture because it's what was it, Sam? Like 25 minutes outside of Roswell.
Yeah, like 25, if even that. It wasn't like super far out of Roswell, but like it was pretty neat. They definitely don't advise like climbing in the rocks around there because like they have like off limits areas because like the ground is actually like creating sinkholes or like have giant holes in it, which is like it was pretty intense. Like I kind of went out a little bit and like looked in there and like it was definitely pretty intense because like you just see this hole and you're just like, I wonder how far that goes.
I don't know if you.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
pretty. How far are you guys away from Roswell?
9 hours. A
So it's a
9 hour
haul,
car.
then.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but we've been going a lot. Like we've done a lot on the Roswell stuff, and then a lot on Billy the Kid, and they all kind of intertwine. We're working on an episode now because Billy the Kid's killed by Pat Garrett. Pat Garrett's killed by a Brazel. Well, his nephew is, Mac Brazel, the guy that actually found whatever happened in Roswell. And so it's kind of funny how everything kind of connects in the end. No, hopefully we get back out there. Hopefully we get out, see the Mothman stuff, and I think we'd love to have you guys back on at some point.
Yeah, just let us know. This has been fun. And like I say, if you want to talk to Sam Morento, he'd probably be happy to talk to you as well.
Yeah, no, I think I'd love. I mean, Sam knows anything Chicago, like I'm super excited about. There's one story about the Christmas tree ship. Have you guys heard about that where it like sank in the river there? It's like really traumatic. Like I mean, obviously that's a long time ago. I don't know if you guys would be able to do the same type of book there, but I guess that's one last question I have. I know you guys talk about a second edition, but do you plan on doing any other books? Maybe not related to Mothman, but like different instances where there's post traumatic growth and stuff.
Absolutely. Do you want to tell them the story of what we learned at the very end of our presentation?
Well, we were unclear about what we wanted to do our next project on. And honestly, West Virginia is so full of stuff. The stories that we heard just at the Mothman festivals, we have a ton of topics. But we had already put the presentation together, and there was like 3 different things that we had listed. So I was talking about them, and the one, I don't even remember what the other 2 were now at this time, at this point, because this was so profound, was paranormal activity and sexual abuse or physical abuse in your life, and the post traumatic growth that comes from that. And I was sharing and I was putting it together. I had not intended to talk about this at all when we were doing the presentation, but it just, I felt like this pull to do it. So when I was growing up, I used to see heads on the dresser, and my mom always told me my eyes were playing tricks on me. And I remember being small and I would peek out from my covers every night for I don't know how long, and these heads would be on my dresser. So I shared a bedroom with one of my sisters, and later in life, I was talking to her about different things because she's scared to death, and and I'm like, she doesn't want to hear anything. She doesn't want to hear about anything paranormal. And I said something about, I asked her, I said, do you remember what mom said about, what our eyes were playing tricks on us about? Because I can remember certain things, but I can't remember all of them, because I know that mom said that a lot. Your eyes were playing tricks on you. And I told her about me seeing heads on the dresser, and she said she saw them too. And because she was an older sister, I'm the youngest in the family, she didn't want to scare me, so she never mentioned it to me growing up. She just always was scared too of these heads on the dresser. Well, during that time, I found out later she was being sexually abused by my uncle. And my dad was an alcoholic, and he was abusive. He would come home, abuse my mom because he was drunk or whatever kid he felt like abusing. So I'm sharing this story, and this girl comes up afterwards, and a lady, not a girl, a lady came up, and Bill was going to talk to her. She was like, had her mouth covered, and he started talking to her, and she's like, no, no, and she's pointing at me. And so I looked at her and I said, did you see heads too? And she's like, and then she's like, but only snakes. And she had repressed that memory and did not remember it until I started talking about the heads on the dresser and the abuse that was going on. So that was like a profound thing for me, that somebody had repressed memories that came open just from me talking about something I had no plans of talking about. I'm just like, because I'm basically saying, sexual abuse is a very private thing. A lot of people don't want to talk about it. You can talk about it anonymously. Harriet Plumbrook is not really Harriet Plumbrook. She's anonymous in our book. So you can come forward and share your story, and you don't have to say who you are. And then that happened, and it's like, okay, so that's where I think we're headed next.
Okay.
So we are looking for people that are interested in volunteering for that type of study, and it would be an anonymous thing if they chose it to be anonymous. Some people don't want to be anonymous. Some people don't have. There was that big Me Too movement. People were posting all over Me Too, Me Too, Me Too. My sister came out then about her sexual abuse on Facebook. Me Too, and it's like, okay, so if that's what they want to do and they want people to hear their story and they want them to know who they are, that's perfectly fine too.
Yeah, no, definitely the people, we experience it maybe not with that subject, but just like be if people talk about ghosts or stuff, we have people that really upfront, yeah, you can have us in your, videos and stuff. And we had one where she was like, no, you can't. I don't want our names. We'll go on the investigation with you, but I don't want any of us because it could affect how we're seen in the community and stuff. So yeah, no, it's interesting, even though it's not like the 1950s or 60s anymore. It still holds like a stigma, so it's still kind of
Yes.
hard to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Or some people are ashamed by
Hmm.
these things. And I mean, Linda Lane was not, I don't know, she's not ashamed, but what she said is she didn't want people making fun of her. If we videotaped it, but she didn't give us permission to use the video. because she doesn't want people making fun of her, is basically what she said, which I don't think anybody would, because she was very proud to be part of the project after the book was released. But yeah, some people think that people are going to make fun of them or whatever. And, some people are just private people, but want to share their stories too. So,
Yeah, no, and I think it's great you've given people outlets to talk, especially about traumatic events, because I'm sure that will help them in the long run as well. Just instead of holding that in, getting it out, will always help. So,
mhm.
no, I think I definitely recommend your book. Like I said, we're going to be doing a review of it as well when this goes live. So people will get both of those. And before we head out, though, do you guys want to tell people where they can find more about you or more about the book and stuff?
Our book is on Amazon, and if you don't have an Amazon account, you can contact us at 2022prp@gmail.com, or on Facebook. We have a Facebook page, Phenomenology Research Professionals. And if anybody reaches out and wants to be part of the study or would like to buy the book, the shipping on Amazon is free. The book's $20. We do free shipping through our Facebook page also. So it'd be $20 free shipping.
Yeah, and like I said, I got the book, so I highly recommend it. Like I've actually read it. So any viewer that's watching, it's legit. Go read it. It's really good. Thank you guys for joining though. This was a blast.
Yeah, it was for us too.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having us on.
Yeah,
I look
no.
forward to doing it again.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely have you guys come back on, and maybe when book 2 or maybe, volume 2 comes out, we'll work on some stuff and get some more stuff going. So thank you again, Sam. I know we've been really looking forward to this, so really thank you guys.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity. It's been fun talking to you guys. Thank you.
Yes. Once again, we want to say thank you to Bill and Jaqi for joining us on this awesome episode of Culz Interviews. I know Sam and I had such a great time discussing their new book, Bridging the Tragedy, as well as some of the other Mothman lore. And I know in the future we'll definitely be touching base again, be it some more interviews, or maybe even perhaps some crossovers like we've done with some other authors. But make sure to go check out their book. I definitely recommend it. It was a fun read, and you learn a lot. I mean, it definitely paints a picture that I don't think you usually get, because a lot of times it's just about Mothman. So this one's good because you learn more about the actual people that experienced this event. So go check it out. It's on Amazon. I'll put some links in the description below. But for more Culz interviews, click that link to your left. For more about us here at Culz Paranormal, click that link to your right. And don't forget to hit that like and give us a subscribe. And let us know, did you read Bridging the Tragedy? And what was your favorite part from this interview?